You're most welcome in this particular museum. There's no admission, no requirement of membership, only a strong and abiding belief in the dark at the top of the stairs, or things that go bump in the night. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Night Gallery.
All right, welcome to Midnight Viewing, the Night Gallery podcast. I am Father Malone.
I'm Chris Stash.
And I am Mike White.
And
wow,
that was good. Now, we are talking about Night Gallery, Rod Serling's follow-up to Twilight Zone. It's a television series that ran on NBC from 1969 until 1973. And today we are talking about episode 1, which actually aired a full year after the pilot had aired. Yeah, the pilot aired on a Saturday night, and then when it came back as part of the Wheel, it was Wednesday nights at 10 o'clock. This particular episode aired on December the 16th, 1970, broken into 2 segments. The first one is entitled The Dead Man, Teleplayed by Douglas Hayes, from a short story by Fritz Leiber, starring Carl Betz, Jeff Corey, Louise Sorel, Mike Blodgett. And it was also directed by teleplay writer Douglas Hayes.
Painting number 1. It's titled The Dead Man. An interesting meeting between flesh and bone, between that which walks and that which, you should excuse the expression, gets buried. So we submit for your approval this and other frozen moments of nightmare placed on canvas.
In this episode, Carl Betz is a doctor who has encountered an unusually young man who has the power under hypnosis to embody any physical ailment. What did you think of this, Chris?
I like that they're talking about something that I inherently have an interest in, which is the usage of hypnosis and hypnotherapy. I think that's interesting. I think it's an interesting place to go. Obviously, this is like you had mentioned, this is a teleplay based on a pre-existing short story, which would lead me to believe that I understand now why it was such a novel concept, because it's pretty high concept stuff. I liked it. The ending is straight out of Tales from the Crypt.
Oh, yeah.
Boy, ain't it.
Oh, certainly
Other
is.
than that, I mean, the ending's still funny and humorous. I think it's an interesting, if we're calling this now episode 1, I think it's an interesting, if this is the first thing that you saw versus the last thing being the first thing you saw, I think this still does a good job of setting the table, the stage, whatever you want to call it, for what is to come, similarly to the way the cemetery set the stage for the previous pilot.
Okay, yeah, I really liked this. I mean, I love Jeff Corey, and I was so happy when they showed that dead body on the table. It was Michael Blodgett, because I was just like, you're a broad! You're a goddamn ugly broad! Yeah, broad Barzinski. Yeah, I was very happy to see him. That was nice. And yeah, this whole idea of the hypnosis, I kind of wish they would have done like a third segment of the hypnosis to do 2 where it works and 1 where it doesn't. And maybe they did, but they might have just like been condensed together in my head, because it felt like they really went from this to this. And, you know, the screw up, the accidental screw up, and this whole idea of like, your mind's tricking you and all this kind of stuff. I was like, that's kind of interesting. And then I did also like that, Dr. Max Redford is just openly cuckolded by his wife, but he seems okay with it as long as he's getting his, his jollies medically, then it was okay. So interesting. And I think having Fritz Leiber behind the original typewriter, I thought really loaned this some credibility and some more interesting turns than we normally would get in a short segment like this.
Yeah, I agree. What's weird is this episode and the next one are going to typify kind of a theme that I noticed running throughout Night Gallery, which we're going to be looking at marriage a lot. We're going to be looking at marriage in the late 1960s, early 1970s, shot through from a horror anthology standpoint. So, I thought that was an interesting aspect of this one. I too loved the. I think the concept of hypnosis and coupled with what we don't understand about the brain is a very fertile concept, and we've seen it before. This segment, all deference to Fritz Leiber, actually reminds me of an Edgar Allan Poe story called The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, where a man is put under hypnosis and then dies, but remains constant in our world, but his body is slowly decaying. It felt very much like that. Jeff Corey is the Doctor, by the way. I love him. I love seeing him in anything he is. And oddly enough, he he ends up directing about 9 segments of the particular series that we're watching. I didn't know he was that prolific a director, but I guess he and Rod must have gotten along. And Louise Sorel, the wife in it, she's going to appear later in an adaptation of an H.P. Lovecraft story called Pickman's Model. I love all the acting in this. I love the concept. The ending is a little, forgetting the code is a bit much. I think you're right, Mike. We needed a moment where we saw him do that once, at least once. Like the second time he fucks it up, and then the third time everything works fine, and then we've at least got some basis for it happening. But I do love the final bit, particularly the sort of use of the flashlight.
When she goes screaming to the cemetery. Good thing there's a cemetery right next door to this house. And then when she goes screaming out and she doesn't stop screaming.
Oh my God.
I was laughing quite a bit.
So good. And I love the very theatrical banging out of the sort of Morse code on the lid of the coffin. But when the Doctor finally shows up and the sort of the one tracking shot and it's handheld, it's so immediate and wonderful. Look, that final makeup, it's not technically a makeup, right? It's it's a mannequin if it's anything at all.
It's a mannequin. Yeah.
That's not
a little too desiccated to be actual makeup.
It's not great, but the effect is pretty fantastic.
It's pretty creepy. I like it.
I did not like
it's equivalent to Norma Bates in Psycho. It's that level of but the way it's lit, right? That's the key.
We do need to talk about the horrible day for night. However, during that entire sequence, it was like day for mid-afternoon. It was and it wildly the quality jumped from shot to shot. It was clearly daylight, and then suddenly it was nighttime. I don't know. That didn't do this segment any service, but overall, I really like this one, and I think it kind of maintains the promise from what we got in the pilot. A year later, they seem to be shooting for a bit of a higher quality, kind of across the board, which I really liked.
It reminded me of it reminded me of Tales from the Crypt episodes as well. It had that very gothic feel to it, which I appreciate. I appreciated that. And I appreciate that they have this kind of modern idea set in a ostensibly gothic setting. I mean, it's this mansion on these grounds with a cemetery. So I don't know what's more gothic than having a cemetery in your backyard, but I would wager that having a cemetery with mausoleums in your backyard is pretty goddamn gothic.
Oh, yeah.
So I like the concept. I like the finale, but I like you said, Mike, I wish there was just a little bit more to build that tension of, okay, is it going to work this time or no? And they just go right into the second one of, no, it's not working this time. Sorry. It's whoa.
Yeah.
Shit, we're just getting to know these characters.
I kind of like, too, that you don't see the finale, that it's just the horror of it from Corey's POV. I had a little trouble, and when the door was answered and she just looked so rough, I was like, okay, how long has it been? I wasn't really sure how long it was until they showed how desiccated what's his name in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls is Lance Rock or whatever. But I was so glad when they showed just how desiccated he was. I was like, oh, okay, so it's been a while, but I kind of wish it would have been I haven't seen you in 6 months or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely needed that. I think like you said, the state of her was supposed to tell us that it's been some time, but that could have been a week later, for Christ's sake, if you're that grief stricken. So yeah, that needed to be more clear. But I gotta say, at the very end, in that shot with the flashlight panning around, the shot of her as sort of catatonic was particularly haunting. She did a good job. It was good.
Oh yeah.
I love a character going insane at the end of a horror thing. All right, and then we're on to The Housekeeper. This one was written by Matthew Howard. That's a lie. It was actually written by Douglas Hayes, who wrote the previous segment. And it stars Larry Hagman, Susie Parker, Jeanette Nolan, and was directed by John Meredith Lucas. Interesting, John Meredith Lucas wrote the Changeling episode of the original Star Trek. So he created Nomad and gave us Scotty's immortal line, "I'm giving it all she's got." That same guy directed this episode.
Painting number 2. Something on the abstract side to annotate that which is not abstract at all. Greed, avarice, and man's constant hunger to change what he doesn't like by whatever means. Said means in this case being a little science mixed with a little black magic. Welcome, if you will, The Housekeeper.
Anyway, Larry Hagman is an unhappily married man looking for the perfect mind for the perfect body. What did you think of this one, Mike?
Man, Larry Hagman is fucking awesome. I mean, I know he played comedy in I Dream of Jeannie, but when but I grew up more with him playing a villain on Dallas. And so when I see him playing comedy and he plays some really just goofy looks to him, I mean, he almost reminded me of like Victor Buono, but like a taller, thinner Victor Buono at times.
Yes.
And
that facial hair.
The
facial hair.
And the hair helmet that he was wearing. I really liked what was going on in this episode. It kind of falls apart a little bit at the end, but man, his monologue when he's explaining the witchcraft stuff to the housekeeper and then how he just kind of drops it like, "Oh, you don't need to know all this." And I'm like, no, we don't need to know all this. And I kind of like that the screenplay is smart enough to just drop it right there, not give us all this stuff. It was pretty funny too, because a few months ago on the show, we covered the Mephisto waltz. So this whole body swapping thing through witchcraft, I was just like, okay, this is kind of neat. This is like the funny version than the Mephisto waltz. And I think it was right around the exact same time. So I was like, yeah, I'm here for this. So, and I love I don't know if that poor housekeeper was as ugly as she was in this episode. I think they made her up quite a bit. My God, what they did with her nose and mouth and everything, that makeup job or whatever they were doing, she looked phenomenally bad, which I loved.
I was expecting Larry Hagman to turn into a Rottweiler. That's what I was expecting when he's dabbling in black magic with that facial hair. I enjoyed it. I think, like Mike, I'm going to echo Mike a little bit and say the ending obviously kind of falls apart. As someone who hasn't seen a lot of Larry Hagman stuff, but works with someone who has Larry Hagman stories. Larry Hagman is a lot cooler of a dude than I was being led to realize, I guess, by the character he played on, the thing he's known for in Dallas, obviously, for a lot of us. So it's cool to see him in this, like you said, Mike, doing something different. And the story, take it or leave it. It's a body swap thing with a little injection of black magic, or science. I don't know. Like, black magic and beakers aren't normally hand in hand. Yeah. It's normally one or the other. You don't normally have a scientist doing black magic. It's a black magic practitioner or a scientist doing his own science stuff. Other than that, I thought it was pretty funny. I liked the way it ended. The ending was pretty funny. But, it's funny, which is weird because I wasn't expecting it to be funny.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I wasn't. If you had told me this is going to be a funny episode, I'd been like, okay. But that's not what I'm expecting.
Yeah. But good that the show is showing its range this early on.
Yeah.
I mean, I do like that they went in a comedic direction. I do feel like it really felt sort of indistinguishable from the kind of speculative humor you would find in like Playboy or any sort of men's periodical at the time. Like that, just that level of this is funny. It's not really funny, but the concept is clever enough. What works comedically here, as you guys have mentioned, is Larry Hagman, who, and as you both, I'm sure, like you, my experience of Larry Hagman mainly was as JR on Dallas. But when you do see him playing one of these roles, you realize just looking into his eyes that man's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And there's something so lively watching him do anything. So I think he 100% saves this particular segment because I'm not crazy about it. I didn't know half of what was going on. None of it really made sense to me. Like, I get it. He's unhappily married to a beautiful woman and he wants all of her money and he can't stand her, but he still wants the body. Okay. So he puts out an ad for an old woman none of that doesn't make any sense. Like, guys, what happened at the end? I'm being serious. Like,
okay,
the maid, another secretary comes in.
We can explain. I think Mike and I know
what happened.
So he transfers the housekeeper's id, or her consciousness, into the woman, the beautiful woman. Beautiful. Yes. And then she wants nothing to do with him, and she's going to leave him. So what happens is the door opens, and here's an even older woman that he then transfers that consciousness into that one, and then take the older woman into the beautiful, the wife's body again. So so he's basically, and I think he's just like, well, gonna try again. And it's like, there's a lot of frogs out there. I can keep doing this until I find somebody that basically bends to my will. Because you're right, this is like a men's magazine.
They've been doing this. Where's the wife's consciousness in all of this?
Goes to the old.
No. They murdered, and they murdered her.
But when we see her and she's being a horrible person, that's supposed to be her.
Yeah, the very first wife is the real wife. Yeah. Right.
And then we're led to believe that they've been doing this for a while, which means they would have done that to the wife eons ago, right?
No. This is his first time doing this. He's only been experimenting on.
Oh, I see. So the line isn't meant to imply that we've been doing it. It's right. We're gonna keep doing it.
We're gonna keep doing it.
Yeah, the line at the end is implying that it will.
See, that's where I was confused.
Yeah.
Right. Until he finds the perfect old lady to put in his wife.
He's a granny shagger.
You know what? I want to say they could have done something more with that, but the fact that it's there on network television in 1970 is pretty remarkable. Also, Jeanette Nolan.
I only watch Night Gallery.
No, Jeanette Nolan as Mrs. Waddle. You were mentioning her makeup, Mike.
Yeah.
I would not have been surprised had you told me that was Tracy Ullman.
Oh God, I can totally see that.
Right?
Had she had a really broad British accent?
Yeah.
If thank you, love.
Everything.
Yes.
It could have been Tracy Ullman.
Oh,
and
boy.
I mentioned in the last segment the sort of trend about examining marriage, but this is an even weirder trend, sort of part and parcel of this one that this episode brings up, which is, it seems to me that at this point, maybe, I don't know, that Rod certainly didn't write this episode, but he is shepherding the series, and we're going to see a lot of episodes sort of dealing with not only marriage, but sort of marriage from the male perspective, like the old joke about, marriage is killing me and whatever, but also like men being emasculated and trying to like revenge, killing their wives. We're going to see a lot of that in this series. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to see how it's handled beyond what it is here, which is kind of the whole thing is a farce, so it doesn't really register on that level. But I do think we're going to see a lot of that, and I'm curious to, like I said, how they're going to play it out.
I, for one, am excited for some Henny Youngman. Take my wife. Please,
who isn't?
Take her.
Right.
Right? I don't know. I mean, that's, again, like you were saying, like we've kind of mentioned now, the humor and the concept is a tad juvenile. But that's okay. Because it is still pretty funny.
She reminded me of a Thelma Ritter a little bit. But then I looked her up and saw her in Night Court. So obviously, 80s, and she does not have that schnoz. She does not have that mouth. So that was just a really good makeup job that they were doing.
Probably doesn't even have that terrible Irish accent either.
And,
Mrs. Waddle.
Yes. I did watch a documentary about this here Night Gallery, and it's remarkable when these makeups work because they were turning these episodes over in something like 2 days in some cases. And in one case, like Jeannot Schwark said, like he turned it over in like a day and a quarter or something like that. So the fact that the production value is as high as it is and it's getting lit like it is, that these are basically like little mini movies. Not only little mini movies, but little mini movies sort of influenced by kind of like French New Wave and like the sort of like all that late 1960s sort of new expressionism going on in cinema. I think it's, I don't know. I'm very excited that we're doing this show. I can't wait to see what we're doing next. So, speaking of which, we're going to take a break and play a segment of our next episode.
Good segue.
Thank you.
These are paintings which represent life, but occasionally death as well. Case in point, this canvas here. A bedroom, but with all the cheer and warmth of a crypt. Beneath the paint and the patina is an ingredient called jealousy. Color it a monstrous green, and call the picture Room with a View. For your approval now, a painting which has to do with time. Not the brief moments left to our culprits in the previous story. Their years of imprisonment were minute little fragments compared to the time we talk of in this picture. We talk centuries now, and what happens when men from one century send back items quite unbidden to men of another. We call this painting The Little Black Bag. This offering is a landscape, lunar and low-keyed, suggestive perhaps of some of the question marks that await us in the stars, and perhaps pointing up the moment when we'll collect something other than moon rocks. This item is called The Nature of the Enemy.
All right, yes, on the next episode of Midnight Viewing, we're going to be taking a look at episode 2, featuring Room with a View, Little Black Bag, and The Nature of the Enemy. We're going to be seeing Burgess Meredith and a very young Diane Keaton. Until then, where can people find you, Chris?
cstachiw.com, cstachiw.com. That's where you can go to listen to the shows I work on, including Dreams for Sale, The Shabby Detective, The Culture Cast, Scary Stories We Tell, all that good stuff. All the things that you would want to listen to that I'm on are there.
That's too many things.
Yeah, sorry. That's why I try not to list everything.
How about you, Mike?
I do fewer things, and you can find those over at the Projection Booth Podcast, which is available at projectionboothpodcast.com, strangely enough. And Chris and I are talking about Columbo on The Shabby Detective, which is available at shabbydetective.com. So those are just 2 things that I'm up to, but the ones that you can check out now and enjoy.
And as for me, you can find me at fathermalone.com. That is a link tree to my podcast, Dark Destinations, a half-hour radio drama I write and produce. There's also a link to my new video podcast, Wolf and Raisin, the Banachek podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. And actually, thank you to HP Music, who has done the music for our little podcast here. And we will catch you on the next episode.